Thanks for coming out today to commemorate Trans Awareness Week with us. I feel very privileged that I have access to a space like this, and I want to acknowledge that I know not a lot of LGBTQ community out there has access to spaces like this, so I feel really privileged and grateful to be here. So today we're here to observe Trans Awareness Week. And for those of you who may not know, Trans Awareness Week is observed every year between November 13 to 19, leading up to Transgender Day of Remembrance on the 20th of November. And Trans Awareness Week is the aim of this moment is to create visibility and awareness for trans people and also highlight the issues concerning the community. And Transgender Day of Remembrance is our way of honoring the memory of those trans people that we've lost due to transphobia and transphobic acts of violence. So this is a really challenging but also very important month for us. It reminds us of all the people that we've lost, but also grounds us and reminds us that we cannot get complacent and that we need to keep doing the good fight that we're all doing. So this year for Trans Awareness Week, we've partnered with GLAAD. And we're very thrilled about this because GLAAD has been an ongoing partner with us on several LGBTQ initiatives, and we're thrilled to partner with them this year. We have some amazing panelists today that'll be talking to us. So I would like to turn it over to our special guests and have them introduce themselves.
Oh, hi. My name is Carmen Carrera. How are you? I started off in television on RuPaul's Drag Race, which led me to work in the fashion industry after my transition and just to continue doing acting and social activism work, as well as using my social media platform to teach, I guess, wellness and bring awareness to our issues.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alex Schmider. I use he, him pronouns. I am the Associate Director of Transgender Representation at GLAAD, the LGBTQ national organization that advocates for LGBTQ storytelling. And we're so thrilled to be able to partner with Google this week and throughout the year on LGBTQ initiatives. And specifically in my role at GLAAD, I work with Hollywood and writers, creators, to tell trans stories in an authentic and accurate way. And really since 2015, there's been a sustained interest and curiosity in doing that. And what we as GLAAD exist as is a resource to be able to accelerate acceptance through entertainment as a vehicle for culture change.
Wow. Nice. Hi, I'm Ian Alexander. I use he, him pronouns, and I am an 18-year-old actor and social media activist for the trans community. I have been in the Netflix series The OA as one of as like one of the first Asian American transgender actors on like mainstream television. I've also been what have I done? In a movie called Every Day and in an upcoming video game called The Last of Us Part 2.
Cool. So just a warm welcome to all of you, and thank you for being here. We are super excited to have you here, and we also want to recognize that we're going to talk about some important and deeply personal stuff here. So I just request everyone to respect people's privacy and ask thoughtful and nuanced questions. So I think one of the things about Trans Awareness Week is about raising visibility and raising awareness and representation for the trans community. And all of you all have been doing a fantastic job of how you raise visibility and awareness for the community and how you show up. So could you talk a little bit about your experience through this journey? How have you been doing it? What are some of the things that stand out for you?
Wow. Do you want to start?
I mean, I'm happy to start because I do this in my everyday work at GLAAD. You know, I think it's really important to remember that only 16% of Americans say they've personally or knowingly met a transgender person. So that means 84% of the American public is learning everything they know about this community from television, film, news stories, and media. And so that's why Trans Awareness Week is so important, because it's an opportunity for allies to learn about this community from the community itself, and for organizations to amplify the voices of transgender people. And I know that for me personally, this is just so important, because when I was growing up, the only representation I had of a transgender man was in the film Boys Don't Cry. And for anyone that knows that film, it's a very beautiful film. However, it shows a trans man who is violently killed when it's found out his gender history. And so if that's the only kind of representation people are able to see and resonate, it doesn't offer much hope. And we know that there is actually a lot of hope and resilience and strength in knowing who we are as people. And so that's why it's really exciting to see both of these amazing people really out there creating and being a part of that representation movement that really moves the needle forward.
Yeah, I think for me, so I started off, I mean, I could just think back, like growing up, I didn't have any positive representations of LGBT people, honestly. Like I grew up in northern New Jersey, a suburb of New York City. There was a lot of pressure. My parents were immigrants, you know, like just to be like, I guess, ideal or like, you know, or be the type of person that you need to be in order to succeed. So I grew up sort of, I guess, just uninformed of like what possibilities were out there for me. So when I was like old enough, like I realized like, hey, but I'm pretty awesome. Like I shouldn't have to feel like, you know, I need to hide or like whatever. So I set out and I wanted to learn about my community. I went to the city, to the Village in New York City, and I met a bunch of really dope people, like drag queens, trans people. I've never met these people in real life. I just knew like the stigma, I guess, that was attached to being LGBTQ. So I'm like, there has to be like cool people out there that are just like me. Like, you know, I can't be the only one, no. So yeah, so for me, working, like getting the opportunity to perform in drag, express my femininity, understand who I was and who I wanted to be, and then going on a TV show, I thought to myself, like, I have to let other people know that, like, the LGBT community is drippy. Like, we have sauce too. You know what I'm saying? And the drip's not gonna stop because of who we love or who we are. Like, come on. That's us getting in our own way. So as far as like being an activist or speaking up, like it just came naturally for me because I knew from the experience that I got firsthand, you know, before television. So it was always like, I have to remember those people that, you know, taught me how to keep my head up, how to be strong, how to be resilient, because they were doing it at a different time when times were even more difficult, you know, because what I was doing was considered trailblazing. So yeah, like that's always been my driving force, is like, I have to get these stories out, like these people need to be seen or else they'll just get forgotten. So yeah.
I just resonate a lot with what both of you said, obviously. I never really set out with the intention of trailblazing and being like one of the first transgender like male people in the media. That was never my goal in life. It sort of just happened. It was fated to be. And the reason why I keep doing it is because when I was struggling, when I was trying to figure out who I was and I was very lost and confused, the only thing that kept me going was seeing like happy, successful trans adults or just like happy LGBT people who made it. Like they survived. They managed to make it through all the trials and tribulations that me as like a depressed, suicidal teenager, like I couldn't understand, you know. I didn't see anyone that looked like me on television. I didn't have anything to base my experiences, what I was going through off of. So I'm just trying to be that person for other people. I'm just trying to show other kids that are like me that, you know, they're not alone and that we're cool and we can be happy and successful and thrive and, you know, we can do great work and that we just need to be given the opportunity to.
Yeah.
So that's my goal as, I guess, a social media activist, is just being authentic and being as open about my experiences as I can be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that I usually like to say is that each one of us, when we show up authentically, we're all trailblazers in our own way. The point being, we cannot get complacent, and trailblazing is a very relative term based on where you are and what your experiences are. So I grew up in India. I did not have any representation whatsoever when I was growing up across the spectrum. I had not seen any characters on TV that looked like me, or I had not seen any people in real life that looked or felt like me. So I think it's a very relative term where you come from and what trailblazing could mean in each of these spaces. So yeah. Today I'd like to talk a little bit more about how tech and entertainment are coming together and changing how we relate to the community itself. I think we're at a time when LGBTQ content can be accessed globally. That was not the case before. Thanks to all the new streaming services that have come in, we're able to look at LGBTQ stories that are positive, that are hopeful, and we're able to reach a global audience. And I know a lot of queer youth in India who can relate to Orange is the New Black, or know about these characters and feel like there is some representation out there. So this is a very remarkable moment in time when tech and entertainment are changing how people understand LGBTQ lives and also engage with LGBTQ content. So from your perspective, are there certain characters that stand out in terms of what you first remember seeing out there, which felt more like you, where you could relate to? And how do you, in your role as entertainers, as media advocates, how do you bring that message out there?
I guess, like, as a Gen Z person, I am always connected to tech. I'm always connected to social media and, like, watching, binging Netflix and Hulu shows and stuff like that. But I never really had a character that I related to. Like, I just, not until recently, at least, I feel like within the past, like, couple years, I have seen, like, such, like, bounds and leaps for trans masculine representation, and I can see, other trans male characters other than the one that I play, and I think that's been really great. Like the character of Theo on like the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina was like a trans character that I related to. Really, when I was trying to figure out my own gender, the representation that I found was not on TV, but it was like on YouTube. Just like trans male YouTube stars and like people on Tumblr and like Twitter that were just posting about their transitions. That was sort of the representation that I was able to receive since I couldn't find any on TV.
Cool.
Yeah, it's kind of the same. I didn't really, I think that I don't even remember any really trans characters that I can think of at all. You know, I think my earliest memory was like Jerry Springer making it okay to perform acts of violence on trans people. Like, that's what I remember. But I think that like nowadays, there's still like part of me that's like searching, you know, for that character, that story, because it's still sort of new. And a lot of the characters that we see on television, sometimes the story is like recycled. And, you know, trans people are so interesting because like there's no transgender characteristic. There's no, you know what I'm saying? Like we don't all live the same life. We come from like, oh my gosh, our identities are so intersectional. Like we are so many more things than just trans, you know? So I think that it's interesting to see a trans person, I think, or a trans character, a trans story, you know, coming from various walks of life. Like I'd love to see a trans person in India and how that life is. You know, I'd love to see a trans person, you know, who is a successful business person, business owner. You know, I'd love to know more trans stories about, you know, people who are stealth, who don't bring up their trans identity at all and how that affects them. You know, because that's really where people can understand our experience versus putting us in a box, you know, and saying, oh, well, that's the trans thing. And it's like, no, like we're so much more. Yeah.
And I'll add to that, I mean, working in Hollywood specifically, again, there's so much interest in telling transgender stories. However, a lot of content creators are working from this template of 100 years of representation in television and film of trans people that are not really based in reality. We've been portrayed as villains, victims, sociopaths, killers, psychopaths, all the worst things you can think of have been projected onto this community without our actual participation or perspective. And so that's what's really been amazing about social media is the democratization of voices. So if you have, granted, this is a privilege to have access to technologies and Wi-Fi to share stories, but it really has been with this proliferation of storytelling means that is pushing the entertainment industry to actually get familiarity and understanding of the diversity of this community. And what I think I love about working at GLAAD, and that when we're talking about representation, we're talking about representation in industries. We're talking about representation of different identities and intersectional identities. We're not just talking about TV characters and film characters. We're talking about we are people that live in every community, in every part of the world, and have existed throughout time. It's only now that people are starting to represent us in these mainstream media modes.
Yeah, and when you're talking about representation, there are two things that come to my mind. One piece is what is being represented today, but what is also not being represented today. Like, what are some of those stories that we're not telling that probably GLAAD is trying to influence creators to tell more? So I know in your day job, Alex, you do a lot of this in terms of influencing how people tell stories. So what are those stories that we're not telling today that we'd like to see more of? And I think this is for all of us. What are some of those stories that we'd like to see out there? Who should be telling these stories? Can allies tell these stories as effectively as people from the community can? Yeah, we'd love to hear from you all on that.
I think, I feel like there's a lack of innocence, I feel. Why, like, you know, going back to what you were saying, like, why do we always have to be portrayed in this, like, as these similar, like, template, I guess, like, storylines? What about, like, the innocence or some of the heartbreak that we experience just being trans, you know, like, so that people can really understand what it is that we feel and really empathize? Because it's very hard. You figure, I think trans people make up, like, 0.1 of the population or 0.1 of the population. So it's hard for the population at large to really deeply understand what we're going through. And I think that storytelling is so powerful. So if we can actually explain the mindset and the heart of what trans people are experiencing once they realize, oh my God, I think I'm trans, it's like, and it's usually early on, it's like in childhood, it's like at these periods of time when we're supposed to be developing who we are as people. And also love stories. Like we love so hard and we have a lot of challenges because we're not taught to love ourselves. We're not necessarily, we detach ourselves from the experience of learning as children and as young adults, that when we get to our adult life, it's so hard to figure it all out because we're just like, it throws you off in just this unique way. And I've experienced this myself. And just, I guess, giving people some insight, because I feel like the society is so conditioned to believe that like we're trying to trick you, or there's so much fear, and that fear gets thrown at us. All that fear, and that's a lot when you're transitioning and you don't understand what's going on. You don't necessarily know like where you want to be or fit in. Like there's just all these questions, and you're not prepared for it. And so if people understood that, how like their point of views can be very harmful, or the way that they treat us can be much, like very deeply hurtful, I think that it would really give some clarity and sort of ease to the situation.
And I want to add on basically everything Carmen is saying, because it's amazing the way you're articulating this. GLAAD actually just launched for Trans Awareness Week a campaign called Trans Love Stories. So it's hashtag Trans Love Stories. And the purpose of that campaign is to show trans people in communities, in relationships, whether they're romantic or friendship or with colleagues. It's to show that we are out there living in society, in, again, every community, and we do have healthy relationships with ourselves, with the people in our lives, because so often the media narrative is that it's just us in isolation. Or in narrative and narrative storylines, we're just there as an educational piece, an educational character to guide someone along understanding what this journey is, when we are real people and we experience, like everybody else, the ups and downs of discovering who we are and navigating life at all different ages and through all different situations. And so to your question, what I think we're lacking in media representation is everything. Like, I think we just need more. And granted, I know that the population of trans people is relatively small. So the Williams Institute estimates that there are 1.4 million transgender people. That's a very conservative estimate, because you can imagine not everybody is going to say on a survey in the US.
Right.
But if in the US that 1.4 million all lived in one place, we would make up the 8th largest city in the US, which is the size of San Diego. So we are not a, insignificant number of the population, and we are so hyper visible with typically really misrepresentation that needs to be countered, because to that 84%, a lot of the ignorance and fear comes from us being totally misrepresented and mischaracterized, and we're countering 100 years of that in really bad form. And I just want to add really quickly to your question about who should tell these stories. Trans people, obviously, should be telling our own stories. However, I will say that for Trans Awareness Week, what it's really about is educating allies about how to show up. And we have a lot of allies who have a lot of privilege and power. And part of that is bringing trans people into stories. If you want to tell a trans story, no one is saying don't do it. What we're saying is involve us in every part of the process and allow us and listen when we give you feedback. I was just a producer on a film called Changing the Game. And I was brought in as a producer, and that film, we've won audience awards across the country, and it's because that collaboration, that actual active listening of what this experience is and what are the media tropes and like how not to fall into those. So, some trans people want to do that education. I work at GLAAD. That is what we exist as a resource for. So I think it's about allies really showing up and supporting our community in allowing us to tell our stories.
I think just to add on to what Alex said about trans people telling our own stories, and kind of just to counter with what we've been missing from the media, was one thing that we do have, which I know everyone brings up, every like trans-related panel, Pose. Pose is really changing the game as far as trans representation goes, because not only are they centering, you know, trans people of color as, you know, the stars of the show, they're also trans women of color in the writing room. There are trans people directing. There are trans people on the crew. You know, there's trans people, like you said, every step of the way to make sure it's authentic and that, you know, this is our story that we're telling. Everyone's story is different, obviously, but there is some level of community that, you know, everyone that is trans or queer, even watching Pose, can relate to that struggle of, you know, being rejected by family and finding chosen family within each other. You know, those are the kind of like uplifting narratives that I want to see more of. I want to see happy trans people. I don't want to see trans people crying as they're looking into a mirror, you know, like that happens. That obviously happens to everyone, but that's not all that our identities are. It's not always about our suffering and our pain. Like we also experience joy and happiness and love and laughter, and those are things I would love to see highlighted.
Same here, and honestly, like, I think that we are so powerful as trans people because we transcend all this pain, you know, and we still keep going and we're so resilient. And I think that there are many lessons that we can share with cis people who are having complications with just overcoming those obstacles of accepting yourself, loving yourself, you know, saying screw you to anyone, you know, who doesn't like you for who you are. Like, we have a lot to offer. And I think maybe also stories of giving guidance would be nice too, to show that you can have a dynamic, loving relationship, you know, between a trans person and a cis person, and it's still like considered to be normal or, you know, not so like, I guess, weird, you know, because people think that it's like, oh, well, we're like all trans people must know each other and we just all like hang out in some like magical transgender land. Like, no, like we are integrated into society, maybe much more so than like the L's and the G's and the B's of our community. You know, like we actually kind of put that brave face on just to go out and like walk straight through that adversity. And we have that power and those gifts from being triumphant in that.
And I just want to add really quickly to add on to what both of these amazing people are saying is that I think there really is so much to learn from the trans community, because ultimately what it's about is self-determination and self-definition. And that's a universal truth for everybody, regardless of your gender identity. We are so policed as a society about what it means to be a man or what it means to be a woman or what it means to be this or that. And what it's about is the freedom to be. And I think trans people provide such insight into being yourselves up against everything that's against you. And there's such power in that. And hopefully it's just an inspiration and model for other people to feel free and brave enough to be themselves. Although you should never feel like you have to be brave to be yourself. Unfortunately, many of us have to be, but that it should just be a given.
That's deep and also a very, very good point. I had not thought about it that way, but it is something to think about. So thanks for that. And I have to 100% agree with Carmen about having to tell more love stories, having to create more hope out there in terms of feeling that, yes, there is hope of feeling love and being loved and having a fulfilling life in a relationship. I think that's not something that we see a lot, and I would love to see some trans love stories out there. So thanks for the hashtag love story and
trans love stories.
Hashtag trans love stories. Yeah, thank you for that. And I hope we can see some of those come to life very soon. So, Carmen, you brought about something. You brought up something in the beginning of the talk about how hard it is. As an activist, you're constantly in this balance of trying to give a voice to the community, but also you take on a lot of the burden of education and advocacy, and I'm sure Alex and Ian, all of us feel this in our everyday life, in the workplace, at home, outside. So how do you kind of find the balance between the two?
I focus on my wellness, honestly. I focus on not giving into like what my ego says sometimes, because part of being, I guess, resilient and wanting to, I guess, stand up for yourself, you develop this sort of complex, like, I can do anything, I'm invincible, like, I just want to keep going, I want to keep proving that, you know, I'm a great entertainer, I'm a great actor, whatever, like, you know, you get so wrapped up in that sometimes. And what I try to do is I try to understand that there's so many other people just like me that are trying to break into this business, or even just trying to be comfortable with themselves. And, you know, taking care of my body and being happy and being healthy, being able to set that example is like so important to me. Like, I'll take the time to step back and be like, hold on, I need to cool it. I need to really understand that I'm also a trans person living this experience. And I'm also, you know, having to heal from my past experiences of transitioning and stuff. So, yeah, I mean, it's just about taking care of yourself, you know, and also remaining connected. Like, I am connected to all of the same trans people that helped me in the beginning of my transition. I'm connected to all the organizations still that I've worked with, that I've had an opportunity to go and speak to and help inspire. Like, even there was this one very young trans person in Brazil who was making a lot of risky choices in their life. And when I went down to film this documentary that I filmed, we got close. Her name's Sophia, and she had just started her hormones. She was self-medicating. She didn't even know what she was taking. And I still talk to her because I have watched her. This was maybe like 3 years ago. I've watched her blossom and be healthy and break the cycle of what we learn from like other trans people in the scene, you know, of how to take your medication and what, you know, what tools you should use to navigate like everyday life. And sometimes, yeah, I mean, it's just about being able to help those people that maybe are not entertainers, or they just want to live their life and feel as good as I feel. You know, so it's that's really the balance, is like keeping myself healthy, but also like giving back and saying, this is what's going to help you, and like sharing information, you know? Yeah, that's what works for me.
Self-care is like such a radical act as a trans person when we're constantly being told by society that, you know, we don't deserve to take care of ourselves, that we're just, you know, ready to be discarded. I mean, self-care is so important to maintaining sanity, especially when I know that, like, you probably have this experience as well. You have a lot of people putting their struggles on you because they're seeking for advice and for guidance, but that can be a lot as, you know, someone who's really visible, to constantly be having, you know, hundreds of people every day telling you their life stories and their struggles and sort of putting that energy on you. So it's definitely important to take a step back sometimes and focus on yourself and prioritize your own needs, for sure.
Yeah, like meet and greets can be hard sometimes. I remember I was in Iowa and I was doing this meet and greet. It was like I think it was the Iowa Governor's Conference, and it was a lot of just youth, like 15 to 18. It was like 500 people. But everyone that came up to me in this meet and greet had a story to tell, you know, and some people were even crying, you know, just because they haven't been able to like hug or hold someone that went through what they're going through, you know? And just by listening to their stories and understanding, like, I don't really let myself get burnt out, because part of me kind of feels like, you know, this is why I'm here, you know? Like, this is my purpose. Because it really makes me feel really good to be able to tell those people, you will achieve your goals. You will succeed. And it's true, you know, because you get so wrapped up in like what the truth of what's happening around you, that to get over that and to keep going can be like, oh my gosh, like the heaviest thing, you know? And sometimes all you need is one person to put it in perspective for you, and then it completely changes your whole like mind, you know? Yeah, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing.
And what I love about what you both said is sort of the premise that you have to put your own oxygen mask on first before you can do it for other people. So taking care of yourself is such a radical act. and is needed to be done. And I think to the question about, constantly educating people, for me as a person, I get fired up and fueled when I can help people along their journey of understand who this community is. That being said, that's not everybody's journey. And I think what we're so often taught and what media often does is says, this trans person is an activist, just because they're asking for full equality. That's not, I think, again, it comes back to self-definition and determination. Not all trans people are activists because we want to live equally in society. And I think it's reductive when we talk about it like that. And instead, look at how Carmen wants to be talked about as, a leading, I'm not going to speak for you or give you a definition, but how would you like to be called?
Gosh, fabulous?
Fabulous.
I like fabulous.
Fabulous.
I want to be a trans mogul. We don't have that.
That's it.
I want to be a real brand. I want, and it takes all these people to take us serious. Thank you. That's really, because I feel that inside, and I know my talent and I know how hard I work, but it's all about, will they let us? And then it makes you scratch your head. It's like, wow, but why are we not allowed? And then that's where our work begins.
Because we're too powerful in their spirit.
I guess. Yeah.
Well, I think that's exactly the point, though. For you to say, no, I am a mogul, versus having someone tell you you're an activist, or you are this, or this is the box you need to fit in. And so I think what I want more trans people to hopefully learn and understand is that you are who you say you are. And there are a million ways to be yourself that are all valid. And just by living and existing as your authentic and true self, that is a form of advocacy in helping, move us to a more equal and equitable society, because that's what representation is: diversity of experience and identity.
I guess I do love the term advocate as well, because it's like we are advocating for our community just by existing, by continuing to, thrive every day. I'll just post a selfie and people will comment and be like, thank you for being so brave. And I'm like, well, I'm just existing. But then I realized that for some people, it would be very brave for them to exist as I am, as a very feminine, flamboyant trans man. A lot of people don't have that ability to express their gender identity with the freedom that I have, living in LA, being born, in the time that I am. A lot of people didn't have that privilege. So it is important to just be authentic and to just continue to live every day as ourselves, I think.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I think when we talk about being an activist, very often, there's a lot of frustration that comes with it. There's a lot of how can we be authentic, but especially when it comes to storytelling, how can we tell authentic stories that are hopeful but not focused on pain and depression and loneliness and hopelessness. So I am really glad to know that there are people out there like you who are telling the right kind of stories, the kind of stories that we all need to see and hear and experience. And I'm very grateful, not just for us to have access to it, but honestly, for a lot of my trans fellows in India to have access to this. And I know I'm speaking on their behalf that this is radically important for them. So thank you for doing all the work that you're doing, and I hope you keep doing this work. What I would like to understand a little more, just digging in a little more deeper here, is when we're talking about technology and how it's changing things, what are some of your thoughts on what these emerging technology companies need to be doing in terms of helping better trans representation?
I think actually Alex brought this up at a panel before, but one thing that I have noticed has made a huge difference is people putting their pronouns in their email sign-off. So when you have, you know, like best or like warm regards or kindly, whatever it is, and then your name, and then you have pronouns, it just normalizes it for trans people so that we don't have to constantly be bringing up our pronouns. It's kind of just always, that's one way that you can be an ally, is just right off the bat when you introduce yourself, you're like, hi, my name is so-and-so, I use these pronouns. That way, as a trans person, I don't feel like I'm alienating myself by being the only person to ever bring up my pronouns, by being, hey, I use he, him. It does feel kind of weird when no one else is saying their pronouns as well. So that's just one way. I think it's a small thing, but company-wide, if everyone just started using their pronouns in their email sign-off, I think it would definitely help a lot of trans people feel more included.
I do that, and I'm glad you mentioned it.
I'm glad that you do that.
And I want to add to that as well. I think that's about recognizing that we all have a gender identity. Mm-hmm. We may be transgender, we may be cisgender, we may not identify as either of those, but it's about acknowledging that transgender people are not the only people with genders. And that's, I know it's maybe silly for some of us, but a lot of people who haven't had to think about their gender haven't thought about it. And I think there's a lot of value in doing some self-introspection about how do you know your gender and what does that look like for you? And then you're able to see that there is more of a spectrum of what that looks like. And I will also add to the conversation about the role of technology in that as the younger Gen Z, thank you for all your just being. We appreciate you as a millennial, older millennial. The incoming generation is more LGBTQ than ever, and that's, you know, for a lot of reasons. The culture makes it more accepting to hopefully be who people truly are. I will say the role then of technology is to reflect the society and the cultures with which we live. And that looks much more LGBTQ than ever. It looks much more diverse in terms of religions and ethnicities and races and, you know, gender expressions. And so I think it's about looking at who is out there in the world and reflecting that back, because that's what good representation is.
Yeah, I think with, so I think immediately when I think of companies, and I think of like human resources and like the policies and our protections, you know, that need to be put in, you know, like, because for instance, it's every single job that I've started, they always talk about like sexual harassment, you know, at the workplace. They always talk about that. But I never see like something written in there for like LGBT, like, you know, like things that protect us. Like it's not part of the company's guidelines to discriminate anyone for who they are, for their gender, for their sexual orientation. Like, you know, I don't really see too many of that. Well, in my past, like just thinking back. So I'd love to see something clearly defined, like give us our own paragraph, you know, so that people know when they start a new job, like these are the core beliefs. And then also too, like just going deeper into that, like I would love like schools to start teaching LGBT history so that these topics are being talked about in elementary schools and in, you know, before high school, so that it's nothing new, you know, like people are not shocked for the one gay person in their high school, you know, it's like it's something that's normal. It's just, it's human history. So we should be included in that as well.
And empowering kids to stand up for themselves.
Yeah, knowing their history, knowing who you are is so important. You know, it's like we're taught like American history, we're taught all these things to have this like American pride, you know, but we come from so many places, you know, like we should be taught just to be more prepared for the world. Because when we go out into the world, you know, there's LGBT people, there's immigrants, there's people from all walks of life that we're gonna have to learn how to not avoid, not ignore, but to, you know, assimilate with, you know, and how can we do that? You know what I'm saying? Like, how can other people do that for us if they don't even know our past or our history? You know, folks who are not LGBT. Yeah.
And it's a collective history. And I want to add to that, you know, there was a big Supreme Court case hearing recently about someone who is advocating for non-discrimination across the country, which basically would say that you are not allowed to be discriminated against for who you are, who you love. What gets lost in that conversation is that this court hearing is not just about our employment as trans people and not being discriminated against. It's about the literal court case is about anyone who defies gender norms could be discriminated against or fired for being who they are. So that means a cisgender woman who wears pants one day, that could be a fireable offense depending on your employer. So it's about gender nonconformity. It's a lot bigger than this trans community. And what I think gets lost is that we are all a part of this collective history and culture. And if we're not looking at the ways in which we share similarities and commonalities without underplaying or erasing our differences, we're missing out on an opportunity for us all to thrive and live as our best selves out in the world.
Cool. Absolutely agree with you. I couldn't agree with all of you anymore. Like it's just humbling, but also very grounding to be here with you all during this Trans History Month and Trans Awareness Week, and my first time meeting LGBTQ celebrities. So thank you for this space, and thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you.